Okay, so I'd like to talk about a fairly big issue right now, and I want you to think of it as a call to prayer, with a action point really, possibly for the church, a bit of a challenge. But first and foremost, like I say, it's a call to prayer, but it's on a subject that for many people can be sensitive. Um, so if it's possibly traumatic for you, I encourage you to not listen to this video. It's going to be around suicide, but also for those of you who perhaps are struggling. Please, 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 and I'll come on to this at the end again, but please, 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 follow some links at the bottom, seek help. But otherwise, let's go through this video. So, you might be wondering why you can see two percentages in front of you, 25 and 70. Well, I've recently been listening to a video, which I'll also post below, from a American moral psychologist and professor in New York University's Stern School of Business. Specialist in psychology, has done numerous books and a bit of research too, and analysis of data out there. His name is Jonathan Haidt, and he was doing a talk that I was listening to at the time with Ben Shapiro, who's done many articles in general. And what he said is really, it's taken me a while to get around to doing this video, but it's really quite a deeply unsettling thing what he says, and you have to wonder why we haven't just heard this shouted out around the world, to be honest with you. This is what we've discovered through their research, and it's around suicide rates. So, for boys, and this is an American researcher, but when you look at the stats, it's fairly similar for the West in general, and worryingly, there's actually a similarity in general for actually most of the world, but particularly for the West. But his stats are, I believe, specific to America. And they found that for boys, and when we say boys, we're talking early teenagers, I believe between 11 and 13. And that was in the early 2000s high. It was 11.9 boys per 100,000. And that has slowly increased, and then basically around a 10-year span, or just under, there has been an increase of 25%. Boys' suicide rate is up 25%. That's a tragedy. And girls, who back in the early 2000s, per 100,000 was 2.9 girls would kill themselves, and again, we're talking about the same age bracket. And back in the early 2000s, 2.9 per 100,000. But when we compare over the same time span for the boys, where it grew by 25%, we see that the suicide rate has increased by 70%. Say that again, 70%. A 70% increase in the number of young teenage girls in America. I mean, that is just mind-boggling that we are not hearing this shouted out on the news, on the media. Not only is it the fact that for a first world, high income, high support, Western environment, that just something isn't just stabilising or decreasing as we see in almost every other area, but it's increasing by 25%. Is a quarter. A quarter. Can you imagine if that was the increase rate for cancer deaths? There would be a national outrage. And that's just for the boys. And the girls' rate of 70% increase in under 10 years. 70%. And frankly, if that does not gobsmack you, horrify you, sadden you, but also make you feel a little bit angry that we can allow this to go on, then I'm not too sure what to say to you. That means that there's a continuously spiking increase of people who have lost support, who want help, who have just lost the will to live, who can't cope with the pressures of this life, who have mental health problems, And that's just a few of the reasons of why this is happening. I just want to say again, 25% and 70% increases. You know, that is truly, truly shocking and appalling. And when we look at the UK, we find, like I say, very similar stats. In fact, suicide in the UK is the most common cause of death for men aged 20 to 49 years old in England and Wales. That's not as the most common cause of death for people with mental health problems. That's not as the most common cause of death outside of medical issues. Of all the causes of death in the UK, suicide is the most common cause of death for men aged 20 to 49. The most common. And that, again, is a terrifying statistic. It does, in many ways, but not for everyone, by a long margin, but for a lot of people, it does link into general worrying increases in mental health problems. Whether it be the fact that major depression, and I mean major depression, has now been identified as the second leading cause of disability worldwide. The second leading cause, and that's only after back pain worldwide. And that if you contribute all mental health problems together, this is the main cause of overall disease burden worldwide. And I'll be doing other videos at some point about mental health. It's an area that I do have some knowledge on and some experience of. But that's a terrifying stat. And so that, for definite, as you've probably guessed, is the call to prayer for the church right now. That we would pray into this, that people would be met. And you might be wondering, but what can you do about it? Well, I remember reading not too long ago, but I think it's been around for a while, about a man who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he was only in his 30s. And he jumped off, and when they went to his apartment, once they found out who he was, he left a note. And on it said, very simply and very shortly, I'm going to walk to the bridge, and if just one person smiles at me on the way, I will not jump. See, we can so often feel like, well, what can we possibly do for such a huge, scary, complex problem that quite often we don't like to talk about anyway? Death is something of a thing that in the Western culture we don't like to discuss, and yet for so many people it's something as simple as a smile. An actual genuine meaning of the phrase, how are you, when we say it, not the general, how are you, good, yeah, good. It's just that genuine openness of actually just being there to listen, to help, to support people. We're not called to be superheroes, but we are called to be there for the people who are hopeless and who are needy, because we know, don't we, that, someone has already died on this earth who was innocent, and that was Jesus, and he came to show love, and he came that we might all have life. And every single person on this planet has a value, and we need to help people see that. I would say that sadly the church has really been quite bad at dealing with suicide. We have routinely condemned them. With at one point the main theology was that it's people's basic condemnation to hell. But we need to realise that this is a growing epidemic in the West, and from what I can see, I can't find the exact stats, it appears to be kind of generically worldwide, but particularly in the West. And that is such a call to prayer, that we on our own and as our churches will get down on our knees and cry to God and say, Lord, intervene in the situation. But also, Lord, show us how we can just help people, how we can support people. And it doesn't have to, like I say, it doesn't have to be big, major, complex things, but it can be as well. I'd almost kind of say jokingly that, quite a common, very useful thing that just gives people time and places to be is just something like a crisis cafe. A cafe that's open 24/7, people can just drop in and they can just have a chat. And the boost that they found through research of the impact of that has been huge. It's really helped people, just having someone they know can just pop in to a neutral person and just honestly say how they're feeling and just offload, has helped so many people who are in these deep, dark places. And you might be thinking, well, but it's quite, we're a little church. How do we afford that? I'd almost jokingly say that, the average newly qualified nurse in the UK is being paid £22,000 a year. I'd almost jokingly say, club with some churches and buy a nurse and get a little drop-in centre going. You don't need to at all. You really don't. But I'd almost jokingly say, realistically, we don't really have an excuse to not, at the very least, being open and more welcoming to people, to show them the love that we have been shown, and to show them that they have a worth and a value. So that's the call to prayer, that Lord, we pray for all these people who are misplaced, that Lord, you would intervene spiritually as well, but Lord, we just pray as well that Lord, you would give your church wisdom and guidance on how, Lord, we can just be in that situation. Like I say, for those of you who perhaps might be struggling, you have a value, you have a worth, there is hope for you, there's hope for your situations. Follow the links below, seek help, get help. There's always someone in every A&E in the country. There's a specialist team called the Psychiatric Liaison. They will see you, they will help you. If you don't want to do that, or perhaps you can't do that, I'll post it below. There are numbers that you can text, there are people you can ring, there are emails that you can send, whatever level. Just say to someone, hello, help, I need to talk, but do it. Please do it. So I'll post that below as well. There we are.